It's going live right now.
Okay.
Well, hello everyone. I want to say thank you for taking time out to connect with Sandra from Nana's Worms. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments box. Not the comments box. Leave it as a question, and Sandra will answer them when she's ready to do that. So, Sandra, I'd like to say welcome to the live stream,
Thanks,
and
AJ.
so introduce yourself. Let us know all some things about you and how you got started worm farming.
Sure. Well, I live in Canada. I live on Vancouver Island, which is about as far west as you can go before you fall off Canada. Um, we are not the Great White North here. I think it surprises most people to know that Victoria has a near Mediterranean climate. So it's not too hot in the summer. It's not too cold in the winter. So we sort of, we go against the stereotype of Canada into most Americans, where they think we're all cold and snowy. And so living here in Victoria gave me the opportunity to really get actively engaged in gardening. In fact, Victoria is known as the City of Gardens. So I've been an avid gardener all my adult life since, especially since we moved to the island about 30 years ago. And but with my MS, I found it increasingly difficult to do the bigger gardening chores. But when I learned about worm farming, I thought, wow, this is something I can do. It's accessible to me, and it's really a worthwhile endeavor, both on the recycling side, plus also the benefits that it'll return to our garden.
So, right now, what is the temperature? I know we're Fahrenheit in the U.S. and you're Celsius. So,
Yeah.
what is your temperature as of today?
I think today we got to a high of about 10, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, that's comfortable. You got pretty decent weather right now.
And we haven't had a freeze yet.
Mm-hmm.
So we came close. We probably got down to about 2 degrees Celsius, which is about 34, 35. But no, we haven't had, and that certainly wouldn't be a killing frost anyway. So yeah, it's sort of like I said, more Mediterranean. We're very surrounded by ocean here, so the ocean moderates our temperature.
Mm-hmm. So, a question for you. Um, you're uh, uh, you have a PhD, correct?
Yes, yeah.
In psychology, or what's your field of
Yes, it's in educational psychology. So I study how people learn, and specifically how adults learn in the workplace. And so that was my research.
okay. So you have some worm bands. You have a Gilligan. Is that the turtle, right?
Yep.
Okay. And
Yeah,
you have
converted sandbox. Yep.
okay, a Cinderella.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your other ones are. What
I've
there's so
named them
many.
all. Yeah, peekaboo, Gus, eat my shorts. Um, honestly, I started giving them names because we started with tumbleweed stacking systems, and there are
Mhm.
4 levels. 3 working trays plus the bottom leachate drainage tray. And I was like, well, which one did I put on top last week? And we were like, should we just call them 1, 2, 3? But then one isn't always going to be on the top, so that order didn't make sense. And so I was going, well, maybe I'll call them A, B, C. Or we were just trying to say, well, how do we know which one we fed last? How do we know which one's due to go on top next? And it was just confusing to me to keep that straight. And so I said, I'll just give them names. So with the stacking systems, my tumbleweed worm cafe became Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny. And then I got the tumbleweed can of worms. We became Iggly Wiggly Fuzzy Wuzzy. And so, though that's where the names came from, is
Mhm.
just to keep the bins straight. And then as I added the tote systems and the sandbox, the converted sandbox, just I carried on with that theme of giving them names.
So, And are they all European night crawlers or red wigglers? I can't remember. We all have so many different types of worms. I forget.
Well,
Okay.
I got worms from one fellow in town here who just sold me like a cottage cheese container worth of worms plus bedding. And they sure look like red wigglers. They've got the little yellow tails. And then in my gardening group, a gardener knew I was a new worm farmer. And she said, hey, Sandra, I've got worms. Why don't you come over and I'll give you some free worms? And so I gave her some basil plants and she gave me a tub of worms. So I've got two sources of my worms initially. And I'm pretty sure there were the Pironyx in there, the Indian blue worms, because some of them just take off like stink, like they're crawling up your arm. You know, they're much faster, speedier little devils. And so I'm pretty sure there were some blues in there along with the red wigglers. And then, as you may recall, we got some manure from out of town, and that brought in to my garden. And then my worm bins, the native composting worm that we have here, the Arcturostrotus vancouverensis, the big guy. So I have at least 3 types of worms. Don't think I have Euros.
So that big worm you just said, what does that eat? Does that eat leaves and everything too? Same as every something different?
In the forest floor. Yeah, it lives in the forest floor here on Vancouver Island and a little corner of the Olympic Peninsula. And it lives right in the leaf litter layer. So very little is actually online about it. But it is a composting worm in the sense that it composts the forest floors. And certainly it was in the manure pile that we got from the organic farm just about 40 minutes from here. So it has come out of the forest and gone into the fields and obviously likes manure like most composting worms.
So what made you get into worms?
Well, just really, like I said, the need to want to take it to the next level. We'd already gone all organic with our garden. And I was like, I want to look for natural sources of fertilizer, and manure being one of them. We were already doing that, but I was just looking at options, like what else can I do to expand, our more organic approach to vegetable gardening. And now that I've been doing it this long, all of our half-acre property runs on worm castings as well as some other natural fertilizers. But we don't buy any chemicals at all for our garden anymore.
I noticed your husband helps you, and you had a kid. I don't remember was it granddaughter?
Yes,
she help with your worms too.
Yes, yeah, she does. Yeah. And in fact, my early videos, the cringeworthy early videos, I didn't know anything about worms, and I was sort of explaining them to my granddaughter in the very beginning, which hence the name of my YouTube channel was called Nana's Worms. She apparently goes to, and it came from her going to school apparently and saying, my Nana has worms. Micah, if you're listening, hi, I'm talking about you. But that's where my name for my YouTube channel came from, because she calls me Nana. And so, her Nana has worms.
And how old is she?
She's now 8.
Okay. So tell me about your husband. What's his thought on worms?
He's very supportive of it. And he, never hesitated when I said, I think it was about day 3 that we had the tumbleweed worm cafe that, it was outside because, when you get a worm farm, it was January, and, we put it outside our kitchen door. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, it's too cold for my worms. Like I was afraid that it was too cold. And so one night when it was going to go down close to freezing, I took a hot water bottle and I wrapped it in a towel and I gave it to my worms. and just put it on top of the uppermost working tray. And after a day of that, I got up in the morning, the hot water bottle was cold. Now, this was a brand new bin. I did everything wrong. I didn't start my bedding ahead of time. Now I know so much better. So this was like worms in shredded cardboard. The poor things didn't have a lot of bedding volume to keep them warm. And they didn't have a castings residue to keep them warm. And so I was worried about them. And so like Landon didn't hesitate. I said, we're bringing them in the kitchen. And so very quickly, they came in. Oh, hi, Karen. Dakine Garden Stuff is here.
Hello.
And so the Tumbleweed Worm Cafe ended up in our kitchen. And then I was on Facebook Marketplace and somebody was selling a can of worms secondhand, empty. So I bought it. So within 3 weeks, I had another 4-level stacking tray system. So I divided my worms right away, got them into the stacking system, and both of those were in my kitchen now. And so Landon didn't bat an eye, bless his heart. He didn't. He didn't mind.
So that's great that you got the support. My family don't want them in the house, but I'm like, I don't have a choice. They're gonna die in the Midwest where I'm at. It gets so cold, they're gonna freeze and not make it. So I'm like still trying to fight with my wife.
I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 worm bins in my kitchen right now.
Oh, wow.
Well, some of them are buckets or trays of castings, but they've got worms in them, right? I haven't taken all the worms out of them. So I've got 9 separate bins that contain worms in my kitchen. And so he has no choice.
So let's see. I forgot what I was going to say because I was listening to all of your great knowledge that you're sharing. Give me a second. I just had a brain lapse. You keep talking. I'll think of it in a minute.
Okay. And so, that brings up a good point is why do I have castings stored? Because, we can garden 12 months out of the year here. And so, honestly, it's a matter of us just being a bit lazy that we haven't got the castings out to the garden to work. So, okay, why do you keep the bins in your kitchen? Well, honestly, it's we've got a large kitchen that has a wall that has space on it for the bins, and it's a convenience factor. I live in a house that has a basement, but I'm a wheelchair user, so getting downstairs is difficult, but I cannot get to our basement. It only has an exterior staircase, and there's no wheelchair accessible chair going up and down those stairs. So our basement is basically for electrical panels and hot water tanks and the furnace and whatnot. It's not for me. In another life, I would have put my whole wormery down there because there's a good sized room down there that we used to have ping pong tables and stuff. And so there is a good sized room down in our basement, but it's no longer accessible to me. So it's really an accessibility factor. My worms have to be in a place that I can easily get to them. And, it's when you have them in a temperature controlled environment, like your kitchen, the worms stay active and productive 12 months out of the year. They don't suffer maybe the heat stresses of summer, but nor do they suffer the slowdowns of winter. So it's a way to get really good production.
Okay. I remember my question now. We all made mistakes where we killed our worms. What was your mistake if you killed any of your worms?
The big mistake for me was when I fed vacuum cleaner contents to my worm bin. And I thought I did it right. I thought, I did a small sample. It must have been just, as much as you could cluster in your hands. I put a little small sample in a worm bin. Within days, 2 days, it was a worm ball. The worms loved the vacuum cleaner contents. Like when you think of what a vacuum cleaner is, like, okay, first of all, we have all wool carpets in our house. So the fibers that would be in our vacuum would be wool. Plus we have a dog that sheds. And so we have a lot of hair, but then, you know, you've got the grit that comes in off my wheelchair, the grit that comes in off the dog. That's what's in our vacuum. Well, I thought that's all natural. Worms can eat that. And so I gave a test sample into a worm bin and they loved it. Well, you know, Landon got the big canister up from the basement and he said, okay, you want to try more of this in your worm bin? And I said, oh, absolutely. And I put about a third of the canister into a worm bin. And the worm bin had moist castings in it already. But the contents of the vacuum cleaner were very, very dry, way too dry for the worms, right? And so I brought my mister out and I wet them down. And I thought, that'll be it. They'll, you know, they'll get into it like they did that other sample, right? Well, what I didn't know is when you wet down dog hair, you get that wet dog smell. And that wet dog smell is a toxic gas to worms.
Oh, I never knew that.
I didn't know that either. And so I don't know, that bin at the time it was heavily populated, but when I went into it and I saw dead worms, they were all through the material. They weren't on the top. They were everywhere. And I just called for Landon and we just immediately pulled the bedding material out, and both of us worked separately going through the material, finding worms that were alive versus worms that were dead. And we were just separating, you know, alive, dead, alive, dead. It was horrible. And we figured about 15% of the worms died, you know, which, you know, there was probably 2,000 worms in the bin. So it was a lot of dead worms. And, you know, and I don't know if more worms continued to die, like the worms that we found. Did they continue? Had they already irrevocably being harmed and they continued to die? I mean, normally, as you know, you don't see dead worms in a bin unless, you know, you time it really at that moment. But when there's a mass die off, you do see it. So that was my biggest mistake. So we took the rest of that vacuum cleaner contents, including the stuff with the dead worms in it, and we spread it on our wood chip mulch, and we checked it with a garden fork a few times in the coming weeks, full of worms. So in the outdoor open air, you know, full of worms. So they like it. It just had to be extremely well ventilated.
Did the bin smell with the dead worms, or you didn't notice the difference?
Yeah, it was awful. Yeah.
So what does it smell like? I never, knock on wood, experienced that. What is it?
It had that wet dog ammonia smell to it. Like it was like a wet dog, and then like an ammonia as well, which comes. Yeah, it was awful.
Oh wow! Thanks for sharing that. And also, you had one of your videos, you had a heat mat, and didn't that almost kill your worms too? You just cut it at the right time, or was that Clive and Jason?
Don't think so. I don't think the heat mat ever harmed it. I'm trying to think.
Okay, it might have been Jason.
Might have been
Clive's condemonium, if that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember somebody else. Our heat mats are thermostatically controlled.
That's good.
So now I will say though that, you know, you've got to put the thermostat in the correct place. And I might have had a video where I said that thermostat wasn't in the correct place, and so that, if the thermostat is a wire, right? A lead wire.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and Gilligan, which has the heat mat in it or underneath it, is a large bedding volume. So if I put the thermostatic wire 5 inches above where the heat mat is, it's going to heat that bin. Like the mat itself is going to get a lot hotter before it warms the thermostat, to the temperature. Now I have it set, it's outside right now. I have the thermostat set at 16 degrees, which is about 61 degrees Fahrenheit, which is perfect warm temperature, right?
Okay.
And today in the sunshine, I was out there in my shorts, the mat probably didn't even need to be on at all. But it's keeping the bottom of the bin, because we've got the thermostat wire now right basically very close to where the heat mat is. So we know the bottom of the bin is not going to drop below 16 degrees. And to me, that means that the top of the bedding, which is about 10 inches higher in Gilligan, because he's such a large volume, that's going to drop considerably. That's probably a good, 2, 3, 5 degrees cooler Celsius, maybe 10 degrees Fahrenheit, but still well within the range.
So that's the only bin that you use heat mats, and the other ones, your other bins are all inside, correct? Gilligan's
No,
outside?
I have 4 in-ground worm buckets that are sunk into our raised beds. We fed them pumpkin the other day. The worms are alive and kicking and doing just fine. Like I said, we don't get frozen soil here, so those bins will never freeze.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you've done workshops, haven't you? Have you done a couple workshops in your community?
I haven't done a worm workshop, although I do a weekly worm chat with a small community. We get together Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific. So if anyone wants to join in our worm chat, let me know. It's just a free Zoom thing I host.
That's cool.
And it's just with other worm farmers. And so we just brainstorm solutions, that sort of thing. And no, I don't think I've done any workshops. I've done, I feel like I have, because people come to my house, donating pumpkins, as you know, and other things. And, I'm always educating about worms.
So educating about worms, question now, it's going to be like off the cuff. What made you start uploading YouTube videos then?
Well, the pandemic, really. I was separated from my granddaughter at the time, Micah, and I wanted to show her the worms, and she wasn't able to come visit. She lives in Vancouver, on the Vancouver side. I live on the island. And so it was a way to just connect and just, hey, look what your Nana's doing. I've got worms. And then I think you were one of the first people who found me online, right? I was uploading worm videos to YouTube, and next thing I know, AJ goes, hey, great video. I'm like,
yeah. Because I like to watch other people that have worms to see what they're all about. And that's really awesome. And I try to reach out, and I'm glad that this was the opportunity for us to connect, and a lot of other people in this community. And that's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. And we both come a long ways. I mean, my first video was like cringy, but I think I'm better now, still learning, which is good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a lot more comfortable on camera, because for me, I was embarrassed. I thought people would talk bad about me because I was into worms. But once you get into them, you find out that they can do a lot of great things for the environment. So
yeah, I bet your garden's doing better too.
This year it wasn't good. I don't know. Like last year, I bought some fertilizer, or not fertilizer, but some mulch, but it had mushrooms in it. You know what I mean? And I didn't like that. So, but next year, it's going to be a mixture of castings and stuff. So my castings are a lot better this year, and I just didn't really have time to focus on my garden with my job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, you're a great supporter to the community, AG. I really have to thank you for that. And I am not the only one who every time you start a video, you go, well, hello. Yeah, I say it right along with you every time I watch one of your videos. It's great. Don't stop doing that.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. Let me see what someone just said. It said, Sandra, I would like to start a worm farm in
Alberta.
I'll let you. What type of worms do you use, and where would I get them? Plus, do you sell any worm products?
I assume you mean Port Alberni. That is an island community. It's a little bit of a drive from me, Gary, but I give away free worms to people in my community. So I've done it to lots of friends. I'm hoping some of them are online here watching. So if you want a worm bin starter kit, come and see me. And all I ask is that you don't make the mistake that I did, is you prepare your worm bin and bedding ahead of time so that the worms don't go into virgin cardboard. And so, just connect with me. And then, if you're coming to Victoria, I don't sell worms. I don't sell castings. It's all for my own personal use. But I'm happy to donate enough for you to get going. But like I said, a member of my gardening group, when I said, I want to get into worm farming, anybody know anything? A woman came forward and said, hey, I'll give you some worms. So that's another avenue. If you don't want to wait until you make a trip to Victoria, just connect with the gardening group and see if somebody local has some worms. They are composting worms, which are red wigglers, Icinia fetida, Icinia andri. I assume a few of what they call Indian blues. Now, the other place you can get them, Gary, is when we've brought horse manure onto our property. It is sometimes full of red wigglers, and they're just all through manure piles, quite frankly. And so see if you can go onto a farm, horse or cow, looks for some aged manure. And if you turn it over and there's worms in it, then the manure is at least worm safe. I have a thing going that I always test for persistent herbicides. I've got a couple videos on that to make sure that the horse hasn't been fed hay that's been treated with aminopyralids. If it has, I don't want those castings in my vegetable gardens. And so that would be the one caution about getting worms from a manure pile. It'd be great to get a worm bin started, but you just have to make sure that there's no contaminated hay in that manure. Cow manure, I think is safer than horse for that. Horses eat more hay. I think I was told that. Mm-hmm. But anyway,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, so Gary, you can get them from manure piles. And if one time we got horse manure, and oh my gosh, was it ever full of worms. And like I said, there's also that big native worm here on the very south tip of Vancouver Island, but most of them are red wigglers. So you can get that, or look out to a gardening group, see if you can get a donation of worms there, or you can come get them from me in Victoria.
That's good. Great information. So you said you test like manures for is there a certain tester you use or something? How does that work?
Well, the three plants that are really severely affected by aminopyralids are beans, strawberries, and tomatoes. And of those three, Jack and the Beanstalk, the fastest one to grow is beans. And so you just plant any type of bean in a soil mix that includes a bit of the manure. I'll tell you, the parts per million that you need for contamination is so few that, even if you just put a couple tablespoons of manure in a little 4-inch pot, you're going to know whether the manure is safe or not. But, honestly, you'll want to mix the manure up just to make sure that it's all come from the same, if there is contaminated manure in the pile, you're getting some of that contamination, if that makes sense. But mix it up well, and then take some manure, make it into a soil blend, and grow. I grew 2 pots of beans, and I grew 1 pot without the manure and 1 pot with manure, just to compare growth of the bean seeds. And so plant 3 to 6 bean seeds in each 4 to 6 inch pot. Let them grow. It takes about 3 weeks. You want to wait until there are 3 sets of true leaves. So as you know, what the true leaves look like, right? The first leaves that come out are just contained within the seed itself. And then you've got 3 sets of leaves that will look like bean leaves. And what you look for is a furling or a curling of the leaves. Well, they'll be deformed. You'll see it right away. And it's a very quick test. You don't have to buy anything other than a packet of bean seeds, and it would last you years of testing. So that's all you have to do.
That's awesome. So also, have you ever done a soil test for your garden?
I haven't done, I have a soil test kit, and I need to do some testing now that we've done major remediation over a few years. I would really love to do some soil testing. In fact, that's on my bucket list for this year to get it done. And I do have a pH meter, and I've checked pH. And that's about it that I've done so far. Oh, too bad, Jerry. Yeah.
I said, well, I don't even know what that is. What is that word and what is it? I'm sorry.
It's aminopyralids. So it's a herbicide rather that is put on hay fields because it kills off thistle, and horses won't eat thistle. And so the hay becomes valueless to the farmer if the field is infested with thistle. So they treat it with Grazon, or there's several other brand names. And they thought that the only thing that this killed was the thistle, and that after one season of being on the field, the herbicide would be deactivated. But in all things chemical, there's always a little bit of a lingering doubt there. And what's happened is they're called persistent herbicides because they are enduring in the hay, and they actually survive the trip through the gut of the horse. So now they're in the manure of the horse. And they actually, if you spread that manure on your garden or you feed that manure to your worms, they survive the trip through the worms. They survive a trip through a hot compost system. They're persistent. That's where the name comes from. And so I think Charles Dowding showed that you could spread it thinly. And if it's exposed to good sunlight, the aminopyralids would be deactivated, in a couple of months. But it has to be a very thin layer. If it's 2 inches down, it's not going to get deactivated. So there are a lot of farms that have had to dig out contaminated soil. And now brassicas aren't affected by it. So your cabbages, your broccolis, your collards, your kales, you could grow that. It's just a matter of, Jerry, you've got contamination. I'm sure you've gone through this. How do you keep the soil straight? How do you know, well, I can grow strawberries over here and beans and tomatoes using this soil, but I can only grow brassicas over here, until the natural expiration of these chemicals, which could take years.
That's good. Like I said, you educated me because I never heard that before. And so I definitely learned something new tonight. So thank you.
Well, I brought it up in my worm group the other day. I said, are you feeding alfalfa to your worms? Because a lot of people get the alfalfa pellets, right? Alfalfa is hay. I would not feed alfalfa to my worms without testing for aminopyralids. I was going to get donated rabbit manure from, I was trying to, be creative. What sort of bedding can I get for my worms? Rabbit manure is a cold manure. You don't need to pre-compost it to feed it to worms. I asked her, I said, what do you feed your rabbits? Hay. Their bedding is hay. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not just getting the rabbit manure from you. I'm going to be getting hay. And I didn't want to have to do the test for it every time I got a load of rabbit manure. So I said no.
So, what you feed your worms leaves. Is there any type of leaf that you won't feed them? Like, is there something that could kill them?
No,
Okay.
I haven't run into any issues. I haven't tried anything prickly, like a holly or a thistle or anything like that. Well, I guess comfrey and borage are a bit prickly, and worms go through those just fine.
Oh, okay.
Peggy from Peggy Hublin's Garden What You've Got, and I did a magnolia race,
I remember
right?
that. Okay.
And those are very waxy leaves, right? And the worms took care of the waxy leaves.
Wow.
Now we have rhodos, we have laurel with the waxiness, we have the magnolia. I don't use those leaves in my worm bins. I've got an abundance of other leaves.
I've heard, I don't know who I heard it from, but I heard oak leaves are kind of not good. Am I correct on that, or is that just
no? What it is,
okay.
and I'll probably do one of my research videos on it. There's a compound in leaves that determine whether it composts quickly or slowly, and oak leaves have a particularly high amount of that compound, and other leaves like apple and maple have a low amount of it. And so they compost more quickly. So for worms, that's better. That means the carbon is more available quicker to the worms, right?
Okay.
So if you give your worms oak leaves, they will compost them down, but will they be carbon starved in the meantime? If you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like if you give them carbon that isn't accessible to them, it's going to take a long time to break down. Then you might get into an overfeeding situation. So I think that would be the only caution. Now we have leaf mold made out of pure oak leaves. The worms love it, but that's being gone through a leaf mold cycle, right? So yeah.
So for a new person that's just getting started, is there a book you would recommend someone to read before they got started?
Well, The Worms Eat My Garbage, right, is the classic. I think my advice would be don't overthink it. Yes, you can kill worms, but for the most part, worms are survivors. They are incredible. I mean, like I dropped one on the floor and found it 3 hours later and got, how is it still alive? Right. But it is. Surprisingly, it still is. They are amazingly resilient. So, yes, you can read a book ahead of time, or you can just, talk to someone else like you or me, and just in 15 minutes, we can give you enough advice to get you going, and then be there for any follow-up questions. I don't want to make it sound difficult, because it really isn't. Yes.
So you have anything you want to share to the community? Like, you have so much knowledge. I don't want to ask you I have questions, but I don't want to overwhelm you. You know what I mean?
No. So. Well, I mean, I am going to start those research-based videos, which I'm really excited about, where I look at published research. So these are scientists whose job it is to study composting worms. And I'm going to be using my knowledge of research and research methods to interpret the research and kind of translate it into the worm community, the do's and don'ts, and some takeaways that we can do to raise our worms. And the first video is on how do you make worms grow bigger? How do you make them huge?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
So that's going to be great. You know, I'm looking forward to that. You know, and now that I'm digging into it, there's a ton of worm research out there. So when you said, is there a book you can read? Yes, but there's also scientific literature out there on worms, and that's where I'm going to be going, and you know, seeing what's hot off the press from research scientists.
Mm-hmm. So James asks, what do you think of in-bed vermicomposting?
Hi, James. I've actually got 4 food grade buckets that we got donated from a restaurant. My advice there is don't use pickle buckets. I did try a pickle bucket once, and the worms all started to escape from it, even though we rinsed it out and we actually sat it out in the hot sun to kind of, you know, off gas, you know, because we could smell the pickle even though it was washed and clean. And so we did that, but when I put, it wasn't an in-ground one, we were just putting worm castings, I think, in it that still had adult worms in it, or all worms, and they all started crawling up the sides, and I went, they don't like this smell. And so so yeah, don't use pickle buckets, but mayonnaise, peanut butter, coleslaw buckets, all those. We got them from a restaurant for free. We drilled holes all around the sides, holes in the bottom, a few holes in the lid, and we sunk them into the ground. We filled them with what you would put in a worm bin: manure, cardboard, leaves. And then we put about 125 worms in each of them. And then just started, you know, and they were just away to the races. And so when you're in the garden and leaves fall off your veggies, you throw them in the bucket. Or if a cucumber goes really soft in your vegetable drawer, Landon runs out to the garden with it and throws it in what we call our garden buckets. And he just opens the lid, throws the rotten cucumber in there, and at the end of the season, I had well over 1,000 worms in one of the buckets. So they increased tenfold in population. And now everywhere we go in our garden, there are composting worms, to the extent that we have to continuously mulch our vegetable garden because there is so many composting worms now in there. They chow down through all the mulch. So you've got to keep feeding those buckets. You can't let them go to pure castings because the worms will just go out into your garden and start eating all the mulch that's there to, you know, keep the moisture in your garden and everything.
So how fast do the worms eat the scraps?
Well, it depends what it is, Gary. If the food is finely divided, like if you put it through a food processor, they're going to eat it faster, right? They have small mouths. And if you freeze it after you food processed it, the little cell walls burst in the freezer, just the, you know, like potholes in the road. When water freezes, it expands. So when the water in the cells of the food freeze, expands, the little cell walls burst. Now it's going to be mushy coming out of the freezer. So now you've got previously frozen food, which also helps you with insect control, but the cell walls burst, so they're going to get into it even faster. So if you feed a raw carrot, it's going to take forever. If you freeze that carrot, it's going to go faster. If you grate that carrot and freeze it, it's going to go the fastest. And so, you know, we've all fed food that is fast food, you know, like that rotten cucumber I talked about is basically pure mush. You know, so if it is layered thinly enough, the worms get into it faster, I believe. If you put it in a big clump, now because you want the surface area of the food exposed to the microbial nature of the bin, right? Like if you've got a great big clump of food, you know, how are the bacteria and the fungi in your bin going to attack the middle of that chunk of food, right? They're going to have to work their way in from the outside edge of the food. So again, spread the food out. That's going to lessen the chance that it's going to go into a hot compost cycle. And it's also going to speed it up. In fact, I think at one point I did a video on how to speed things up. And that's one way to do it, is you kind of work the castings a little bit into the food as you feed it. And oh my goodness, does that speed it up? The worms will go through it in, a half, a third of the time, as if you just sort of leave the food. You kind of do what everyone does: a layer of cardboard, a chunk of food, a layer of cardboard. It's going to take them longer than if you mix the carbon and some castings into the food itself. Actually fluff the food, if you like, with castings.
So I can't just put straight food in it. It has to be mixed with carbon. Like if I was new and, the worm tower.
I very rarely don't feed carbon. Very, very rarely. Like it should be like it should be a 2-to-1. Most people say eyeballing it, it's 1-to-1. But I think, given that you started with bedding, that was a big infusion of carbon. I think net, it's got to be more like a 2-to-1. And always err on the side of more carbon. My one case when I pull back on that is if the bin is carbon heavy. And I've had that a few times where, the bin just looks like my paper shredder. It just looks like all shredded paper. And if I can see that there's a lot of carbon in there, I might not feed more carbon that time. But most of the time, first, you want to bulk up your bin. You want the castings, right? So you want to keep adding carbon. And secondly, the worms need it, for balance.
I'm typing a little message on the side real quick.
Wow. So Janice, I'm almost done mowing about 100 bags of leaves for my leaf mold. Wow. Good for you. 100 bags. We use mattress bags we get from a local mattress factory, and we put our shredded leaves in mattress bags. Of course, they've got holes in them because these bags were, going to go out for the recycling. And we just leave them for a couple of years, and that's what turns into leaf mold for us. That's one of the ways. And then the other way, we use our plant container pots that we're not using for the winter. We fill them with leaves through the winter. We did a little video on those, one of my shorts. And I was going to take a picture of it the other day because we just did that video maybe 6 weeks ago, and it's already really broken down. And because you put the plant container in touch with the soil, and the plant container has holes in the bottom, by spring, that'll be full of worms. They come up into the leaves.
I know it's funny, like when you raise worms and you see like your neighbors raking the leaves, you're like, I could use those.
Well, we do. We go up. We don't have an oak tree in our yard, but I live in a community called Oak Bay. Actually, it's a suburb of Victoria. It's its own town, actually, in Victoria. And but we don't have an oak tree, but neighbors do. And so we wait until the big piles of oak leaves appear at the base of their driveway or across the road. And Landon goes down there and shovels them into the wheelbarrow, or 2 or 10, or we take our mattress bag down the street and fill it with oak leaves. Because I do want both. I want maple leaves, but I also want oak leaves. But we keep them separate.
So do you like, how do you get them like really fine on your videos for like Gilligan, your leaves? Is there a method you use to get them like that?
Landon,
I never see them like big. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'll show you a big maple leaf. They're huge. If my sister's watching, she may remember telling me years ago that in British Columbia, one maple leaf is one wheelbarrow load. The maple leaf. In fact, the table that I'm sitting at is from a big leaf maple. It's a big slab of a big leaf maple tree. And that's the maple trees that we've got in our yard. So the leaves are huge. So Landon runs them through his mulcher, which is, he's got a leaf blower, but if you put it in reverse, it mulches. It sucks and mulches. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering, because they're big leaves, and yours are always like fine and the nice size for your worms.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll break down faster that way, and it just is easier for me to manage in a worm bin, those big maple leaves. So, I put the odd one in, well, probably quite a few in from time to time, but I try to always use the shredded.
So you said that, have you ever, back in the past, have you ever put like the big leaves in there, like a huge?
I think the first year I did. I don't think we were shredding them the first year. And they pancake down much like grass clippings would, right?
Okay.
Now the worms, like remember Anne in Plant Obsessed when she did her lasagna bin and the worms are all like crawling between the layers?
Yeah.
So the worms in those maple leaves that glue together when they're wet and just saturated, they crawl between the layers. They're fine. But for worm bin management, it's a little bit more difficult because you can't manipulate the material quite as easily when it's just leaves all pancaked together.
So another thing, with your pumpkins, do you get a lot of sprouts, I'm guessing, don't you, or not? How does
not yet? No, we roast the seeds, AJ.
Oh, okay.
We've been eating nothing but pumpkin seeds for the last month.
Okay. Okay. They're good.
I know they are excellent. Really good. No, yeah. So for those who don't know, I did a community pumpkin drive, and I think at the end of the day, we probably had over 200 pumpkins donated after Halloween. A lot of these are just beautiful uncarved pumpkins. People would just drop off 8 pumpkins and say we didn't get around to carving them for Halloween.
Oh, wow.
And so those ones, we take them inside, scoop out the seeds and roast the seeds, and then we feed the pumpkins to the worms. So our freezers are full of pumpkin, but we probably have about 20, 25 pumpkins. You could, some of them right there. Wow. Sitting around because they were donated whole, uncarved, and being outdoors right now is like being in a refrigerator, like I said, 50 degrees. So they just stay outside out of the rain and they'll last quite a while. And so they didn't have to go into our freezer.
Let's see. I have 8 bands of red wiggers in my dining room and a tower in the kitchen. Janice said that.
What your guests don't know won't hurt them. I have
exactly
1, 2, 3, 4 worm bins in our family room. Yeah. At least 4.
So why do you have so many worm bins?
Oh, because I do quick harvesting, AJ. So I do a migration method where, you train the worms as much as they can be trained to all go one way. Everybody go this way. So I feed in one location, and after I'm satisfied that the worms have more or less moved there, I pull like 75, 80% of the material out of the bin and I put it into another tote. And that essentially becomes a worm bin. There are still worms in it. There are still cocoons in it. I don't sift them. There is still unfinished material. It's probably about 80 to 85% finished, right? When I do that. And so it's in my family room because that's where I watch TV. So I will watch TV and go through it with my hands and pull out the adult worms that might breed, put them back to work in one of my worm bins. That usually takes me like an hour, right? Watching a TV show, I'll go through the worm bin, pull out the adults. Not worried about the babies and the little guys. I'll let them continue to grow up, eat the rest of the material. wait for the cocoons to hatch, let them grow up a bit. So they're in my family room waiting for that process. So I pull out the adults, wait another couple weeks, pull out more adults, wait a couple weeks, pull out more adults. So it takes me about 6 or 8 weeks before I'm satisfied to get those castings out to the garden. And if when Landon heads out with a tub of castings and says, "Oh, I'm just going to go give these to the blackberries," I always go, "Let me go through it one more time."
Yep, no worm left behind.
No worm left behind. I mean, I don't care if they live in the blackberries, that's fine. Yeah. But you know what I mean. You understand.
Yeah, I definitely understand. Let's see. If any viewer has any questions for Sandra, please leave them, because we'd like to find out and share some more information with you. But what have you done to encourage someone to start a worm bin or a worm farm?
Well, I definitely, by doing just on my local Facebook gardening, not even just the gardening groups, just the local Facebook groups, I've asked for donations of egg cartons. That starts a conversation, right? I say, does anybody have any egg cartons? I'm collecting them for my worms. Oh, Sandra, I can give you egg cartons, and then they come over. Would you like to see my worm bins? Blah, 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 So I asked for eggshells, and one woman, she lived in an apartment. But she, like me, had a disability that she could no longer actively garden. So now she had moved into an apartment, but her mentality was she always collected eggshells for her garden. So she gave me this massive container of eggshells that she had collected over many years, long after she'd given up gardening, but she couldn't stop the habit of collecting and crushing eggshells. And so she gave them to me for my worms, right? So I look for opportunities to engage people in that conversation and ask my community for donations of items, the pumpkins being, sort of the most, tongue in cheek, but also really substantial. Like several people said, well, normally we just throw them right in the garbage. Yeah. I just can't imagine putting pumpkins in a garbage.
Yeah, I know. It's weird how, since we became like this mindset, how we look at life differently.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
Just find ways to engage people. I am a former teacher, so I would love to go to schools and do that. I've reached out to a couple teachers I know, and hopefully, when their lives get some space in them, that we will work something out, but they don't live here. I haven't reached out. I don't know any teachers that are local, but, I certainly could reach out to the local schools and will do so. And through the pumpkin drive, I said to several parents who said, "Oh, I really think we should get into this, maybe the school." I said, "Tell the teacher if she wants to get into this, I'll donate some worms to get her going, get her to get hold of me." So I've put those sort of feelers out there to help. And one day I will. Maybe, I'll approach the elementary and high school and see if they're interested. But I'm also not going to set them up for failure. I think putting a worm bin in a classroom would be a colossal mistake. Yeah. If you're just like saying, "Oh, and the kids will throw their bologna sandwiches and their whole oranges and granola bar wrappers, and it'll become a refuge site." So my thinking is that I will set up worm clubs in schools, and you get a group of 5, 8, 10 kids that will listen to the education and take it upon themselves to say, "Okay, you two are responsible for the bedding this week. You two are responsible for the food this week." And if someone's away, another person is there to do it. But you are the only people allowed to put things in the worm bins. Now, the other thing to do here is to have the worm bins outside, and they'd be more forgiving then. The worms will just leave if the kids created a unsavory environment. But I mean, I was a kid once. I've taught children. I know that, they will, oh, let's see if the worms will eat this, and dump things in a worm bin or just not understand the restrictions. And, like I said, every teacher has heard the thump, thump, thump of whole oranges hitting the garbage as kids throw out their lunch bags. They don't eat the fruit that most parents send for their lunch. So we've all heard that as teachers in a classroom, and I'm afraid that would happen to a worm bin. So I don't think we can be carte blanche and just say, oh, a worm bin for every classroom. You have to have a teacher that's dedicated to it that will restrict access to just a small number of students who know what to do.
Speaking of food, I think it's both you and Peggy. You tried that tape from Amazon, and it's not biodegradable, correct? It doesn't break down?
No.
Okay.
I tried it. I had what I called my Amazon tape only worm bin. Now I did give these worms cardboard shred, but they got huge lengths. I cut the Amazon tape off boxes. So they got the cardboard that was on behind the box as well as the tape. But I didn't cut the tape. So it was easy to find. And it was just great big long lengths of string. And it stayed in the worm bin 8 months.
Oh, wow.
And this was an established worm bin. There was no doubt the worms were not going to eat that. So I took the clump of material and I put it in a mesh bag and I put it in our thermophilic compost. The compost went to 160 degrees for a week or more. And that tape, those strings were still in that bag, which proves to me they're not even compostable in a thermophilic compost.
That's what's good about like having this community, because I can watch other people's videos and learn from them and like, okay. And like if I get the boxes, I'll just like rip it off and then shred the cardboard as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for doing that video because you helped me out. Because a lot of things say it's biodegradable and that's not true.
No. Well, and I mean, like sometimes biodegradable, like those green bags that we all think were biodegradable, they need UV. They need to be exposed to sunlight, sometimes for a long time to be biodegradable. Well, a worm bin is dark, right?
Yep, exactly.
So Gary, no, the closest I've given meat, and there's absolutely no smell coming from worm bins. In fact, worms, nothing pathogenic comes out the butt end of a worm. So there's no odors, no smells to worms. But if there is, then there's something wrong. The meat that we've given hasn't been meat per se, but we make our own bone broth, run bones twice through the Instapot. And by then, well, it's called bone broth for a reason. A lot of like the neck bones and whatnot of a chicken will dissolve, but there'll still be some of the larger bones will still be visible. And so what we do is we then crunch them up in our food processor as much as we can. Although one time it was still quite a sizable chunk. And I put those in my garden buckets. And they're gone. Like even that big, chicken drumstick bone that I put in, or turkey drumstick bone that gone in the buckets, and the in-ground garden buckets. And so it's basically bone meal at that point, right? There's no meat left on it, no cartilage left on it. It's strictly bone. And because it's gone through the Instapot, it's been greatly, the minerals are being pulled out of the bones, and that's what we drink and eat. So
it's awesome. So you said the bones, the worms eat the bones. They can.
Yeah. Well, the microbes do. The microbes do.
Okay.
And then the bones just disappear. I did it in a worm bin. The first time, I think I did a video on it. The first time I actually put the bones in a worm bin, and they disappear. And just like, well, it's not quite the same as the prawn shells I give all the time. Prawn shells are made out of chitin and bones, I believe. Aren't bones calcium carbonate? Are they calcium carbonate? Yeah, have to check that.
Mm-hmm.
Harder material anyway, harder to break down.
So you said the thing that helps it is because it goes to the ester pot and that just keeps softening it and weakening it to allow them the opportunity to do that. Correct?
Yeah. Now worms would eat bones that were from a raw pork chop, right? But they would take a long time to do so.
Okay.
And you'd open yourself up to the smells that Gary mentioned, as well as rodent problems and
you don't want that.
And ants and everything else that'll come to the picnic, right? So
exactly.
So the bones that we put in have been, pressure cooked for 90 minutes. So they have no material left on them at all.
That's right. I hear you. That's awesome. So with the time being an hour, I try to keep it within an hour.
Okay.
Do you have anything else you would like to share?
Well, this was delightful. I really enjoyed this. AJ, it's just been wonderful. Just thank you. Thank you for everything you do for the community. And I know you and I are in it for the right reasons. And I'm just so pleased to be a part of the worm. What did Captain Matt call us? The worm people.
Yep, the worm people. And like I said, it's awesome that we both, took the opportunity. We uploaded videos and we connected, and a great video, and now we're good friends. And this community is just awesome, and that's what I like about this worm farming community, because we all help each other. We don't hide things. We share what we know, and I'll direct them to someone else's channel if I don't have the answer, and you're the same way. So that's awesome. But when you write your book, I would like a signed copy, please.
For sure. I'll write a book.
I hear you. I want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this. It's just awesome how things have worked out, and just keep the videos coming, and I'll keep checking them out, and we'll support one another. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Sandra's Nana's Worms and Garden. Give her some love and support. She makes great videos. She uploads at least once a week from what in a perfect world. So everything's going well. So check her out. Give her some love. So I want to say thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good night, everyone. Bye.